They said the guest room was taken. Just like that. No apology. No eye contact. Just a casual, hope that's okay, as if being shuffled into a garage like an afterthought was normal, expected even. I stood there on the porch, suitcase in one hand, my knees aching from the flight, and smiled like I meant it. My daughter Shilly didn't look up from her phone when she said it. Her voice was light, airy, as though this were all perfectly reasonable. We've got an air mattress in the garage. Grandma made it real cozy. Real cozy. That was the phrase that played in my head later that night as I lay under a thin blanket beside a shelf of dusty paint cans and a lawnmower they never used. The floor was concrete. Cold seeped into me like water through a crack, and no matter how I shifted, my hips screamed back. I clutched the old tulip quilt-I'd crocheted back in '82, the one with the orange and green stripes. It used to sit on our family couch, back when people still cared enough to sit close. That night I didn't sleep. Not really. I just laid there pretending, the way mothers do when they want their children to feel unburdened. My breath came out in visible puffs. I didn't complain. I didn't knock on their door or ask for more blankets. I didn't even ask who was in the guest room. I knew better. I've known for a while now. I heard laughter from the living room aloud, loose laughter, the kind that comes from wine and comfort. They were hosting. Someone important enough to take my place. A cousin, maybe. Or someone from Greg's office. I stopped guessing a long time ago. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, or rather, the bottom of a storage shelf, and thought of James. My husband's been gone 22 years. But I still whisper to him sometimes when no one's listening. You wouldn't have let this happen, I told the cold air. The words sounded brittle, cracked from the cold, and something deeper. At 4:15 a.m. I sat up. My joints protested. My back felt as stiff as the lawn chair beside me. I opened the side door, the one that leads to the driveway, and stepped out into the freezing dark. Stars still clung to the sky like tiny sharp truths. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. Just walked. Down the driveway. Past the porch light that flickered. Past the roses I helped Shelley plant last summer, though she tells everyone they came with the house. I was wearing my thick cardigan, the oatmeal-coloured one with the frayed sleeves, and a pair of slippers that had no business being outside. But I didn't stop. There was a bus station a mile away. I knew that because I'd checked. Quietly. A week before I flew in. A small part of me had known even then some intuition honed by years of being politely unwanted. At the station, the woman behind the counter blinked at me. No coat, she asked. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I had a place to stay, I said, until I didn't. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded like she understood more than I'd said. One way, she asked. Yes, I said. Anywhere that's not here. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I always thought if this day ever came, the day they'd look me in the face and place me beneath the roof, but outside the walls I'd fall apart. But I didn't. I just felt something loosen inside me. Not like a thread pulling you, more like a tether untying. Quiet. Gentle. Final. Because here's the truth, they didn't scream. They didn't throw me out. They offered me a blanket. An air mattress. They smiled. They were kind even. But disrespect doesn't always sound like shouting. Sometimes it sounds like, hope that's okay. And sometimes the warmest act of defiance is simply walking away from where you're only tolerated. The morning sun filtered in through the garage's tiny high-set window, its light more grey than gold. I had dozed off sometime after 5, cold like a comma on that narrow cot, my back aching from the bend of it. The space heater's red light had blinked out sometime in the night. I hadn't noticed when. I moved slowly, careful not to jar my hip too sharply, and sat up. My legs dangled just above the cold concrete floor. For a moment, I watched the dust motes dance in the light, the way they always did in the house James and I shared long ago. He used to call them sun sprites. Said they were proof that even stillness had life. I didn't hear anyone stir until nearly 8:30. Then came the familiar clatter of dishes, the creak of that cabinet over the microwave that always stuck just a bit. I opened the side door and stepped into the hallway, smoothing my cardigan as I did. My fingers were stiff with cold, but I flexed them quietly and smiled when I reached the kitchen. Morning, I said. Shelley glanced up from her phone. Greg was pouring coffee. Neither looked surprised to see me. That stung a little. Not that I expected a fussy, just acknowledgement. Warmth. Hey, Mum, Shelley said. Coffee's fresh. Greg gestured vaguely toward the pot as he picked up his mug and headed back toward the dining room. Shelley stayed at the island, one knee drawn up on the bar stool, scrolling. I poured myself a cup and wrapped my fingers around the warm ceramic like it was a life preserver. The heat seeped into my hands, but not much deeper. Did you sleep okay? Shelley asked, still not looking up. I nodded. Like a baby. The words felt foreign in my mouth. Light, cheerful, false. She hummed and stood, brushing crumbs from her sweatshirt. Oh, by the way, Liz and Travis are coming this afternoon. I blinked. Your cousin Liz? She nodded. Yeah, they were passing through. We offered them the guest room. Hope that's okay. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into soft clouds. Of course, I said, my voice even. Of course it's okay. Liz. Younger, vibrant, always talking over people and laughing at nothing. Shelley adored her. I used to, too, back when family gatherings were noisy, shared, equal. But now Liz got the guest room. I got the garage. That was the moment. It wasn't the cold, or the scratchy blanket, or the folding cot. It was this, the quiet assumption that I wouldn't mind, that I wouldn't notice, that I would smile and nod, grateful just to be near. I brought the mug to my lips, let the steam rise into my face. My fingers trembled slightly, not from the temperature this time. Greg returned, still half dressed, muttering something about traffic. Shelley was already in the other room. I stood alone in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the silence they left behind. I looked around. The walls were painted a cheerful sage green. My daughter's doing. She liked cool tones. She liked everything curated, candles that matched the season, soap dispensers shaped like pumpkins in October, snowmen in December. And yet the picture frames on the wall held no photos of me. Not one. I remembered buying the frame set for her when she moved in. A display memories, I'd said, handing her the rat box. Fill your walls with love. She'd had me back then. Said she would. But now it was filled with vacation shots, candid giggles with Liz, blurry close-ups of wine glasses and beach sunsets. I wasn't in any of them. I turned my back to the counter and sipped slowly, carefully. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just aware. That's how it starts, you know. Not with a fight. Not with yelling. With forgetting. A slow erasure masked as convenience. I returned to the garage mid-morning, claiming I needed to sort my suitcase. The air had warmed slightly from the sun, but still hung with the smell of oil and old pine cleaner. I sat on the cot and picked up a pair of thick socks I'd packed. My knees were always cold and found myself holding them like they might give me answers. And that's when I saw it. Tucked behind a stack of unused Christmas bins, there was an old photo. A frame. Dusty but still intact. I reached for it carefully, fingers brushing against a layer of grime. The picture was from a summer picnic maybe 15 years ago. James and I on one side, Shelley holding a melting popsicle, Greg behind her looking awkwardly at the camera. It had been a hot day, I remembered. I'd packed too much food as always. Shelley had laughed when the ants got into the potato salad. I turned the photo over, my handwriting on the back. Together always, July 2007. Something in my chest pulled tight. I sat there a long while, the photo in my lap, the garage door creaking lightly in the wind. The space heater blinked red again that week, blinking light that offered more hope than heat. And I thought, so this is what it looks like. When you fade, not all at once but inch by inch, until you're background noise in your own family's home. I looked down at the frame, at my own neat handwriting, still steady, still sure, and wondered who had shoved it back here. Who had decided it no longer matched the walls. It's the little things that go first. That's what no one tells you, how becoming invisible isn't sudden. It doesn't happen in a single cruel moment. It seeps in through small cracks, in skipped introductions, forgotten preferences, laughter that doesn't quite include you. It happens in rooms where people speak around you, never to you. That afternoon, they ordered takeout for lunch. Shelley had her tablet open at the kitchen island, flipping through the menu from a nearby cafe. Greg wants the cob, I'll do the quinoa bowl, she said, tapping quickly. Do you want anything, Mom? I smiled. Maybe just the soup. Shelley didn't look up. They only have lentil. You don't like lentil, right? I do, actually. But she'd already tapped past it. Greg called from the living room. Tell her we have leftovers if she's not picky. That's how it's said. Half joked. Lightly. Not meant to wound. But it does. I ate cold chicken and green beans from the night before, alone at the kitchen table while they sat on the couch, legs tucked up, the tray between them, watching something loud and fast on TV. I heard Shelley laugh, that easy laugh she used to save just for me. Now it came for Greg's muttered jokes, for the sound of her phone buzzing with texts from Liz. The guest room was closed now. I noticed the door had been shut since noon. I hadn't seen Liz yet. Maybe she was napping. Maybe she'd just arrived, but her suitcase was there. I heard her voice briefly. Warm, animated. Welcomed. I cleared my plate and rinsed it. The dishwasher was already running, so I dried it with a paper towel and slid it back into the cupboard. Quiet habits. Learned behaviours. I used to hum when I cleaned, used to fill a room with motion and melody. Now I moved silently, like background music they'd long since learned to tune out. At 3:30, I asked if I could help with dinner prep. Shelley blinked, mid-text. Oh, don't worry about it, Mom. We're keeping it simple. Liz is vegan this month. I nodded. I can make a salad. It's fine, she said, sharper now. We've got it. So I went back to the garage. Not angry. Not yet. Just tired. I sat on the cot with the tulip quilt pulled over my lap, looking at my hands. These were the same hands that once made Shelley's Halloween costumes from scratch. The same hands that held her through fevers and dance recitals and first heartbreaks. They'd mended clothes and smoothed hair and stirred countless pots of soup. Now they rested on my knees idle. Empty. I read for a while. An old paperback I brought from home. The kind with curled pages and a spine soft from reading. But the words didn't hold. They slid past me, no longer anchors. Dinner came in, went. No one called me in. I heard voices. Plates. Laughter. A chair scraped back. The clink of wine glasses. I waited, unsure if I'd missed the invitation. I told myself maybe they thought I was sleeping. Maybe they didn't want to wake me. Maybe. At 7:20, I opened the side door and stepped into the hallway. The dining room was still lit, but the plates had been cleared. Shelley was placing dessert on the table, small ramekins with something golden on top. Cream brulee. My favourite. She saw me and paused. Though we didn't think you'd want any. I smiled gently. It smells lovely. Liz brought them, she said a little too quickly. From that French place on Baker Street, you know, the one you said was overpriced. I didn't remember saying that. Maybe I had. Maybe I hadn't. It didn't matter. I nodded, pretended I had a headache, and returned to the garage. The door closed softly behind me. That night I didn't even try to sleep. I lay there listening to the wind, to the faint buzz of voices from the house, to the occasional hum of the space heater's half-hearted effort. My feet were cold. My shoulders ached. But it wasn't the temperature that unsettled me. It was the realization that I had become a detail in someone else's life. Not a character. Not a presence. Just a footnote. When had it started? Not this weekend. Not even this year. It had begun long before the first time they sent a group text instead of calling. The first birthday card signed with just the grandkids' names. The time they went to Hawaii and said it was a cabin trip. The day Shelley forgot that I loved cream brulee. I used to be the sun around which everything orbited. Holidays. Sunday dinners. Advice calls. Grocery lists. Now I was a dim lamp in the corner, always on, but never noticed. I opened my purse and pulled out my wallet. Inside was a slip of paper, just a few lines I'd written a while back. Names. Numbers. Emergency contacts. Bank details. My handwriting was small, careful. I had it from when everything needed lists. I stared at it for a while, then folded it back and placed it inside the family photo frame I'd found earlier. I tucked it behind the glass, behind the image of our younger selves. A quiet note, I was here too. I remember because I'd burned the first pie, left it in the oven while I chased Greg through the yard after he let the dog out. James had laughed until tears formed in the corners of his eyes, saying it was the first time in 20 years I'd ever botched a dessert. Shelley had been home from college, bright-eyed, full of stories, dressed in a sweater 2 sizes too big and socks that didn't match. She brought a boy with her that year, a tall, nervous thing with hands that shook when he passed the gravy. The house smelled like cinnamon and cloves. We had 2 turkeys, 1 roasted, 1 deep-fried. James had insisted on trying the fryer after seeing it in the morning news, and I had nearly had a heart attack watching him load the bird like a surgeon performing a delicate operation. The dining table was stretched with the extra leaves we kept in the garage, and every chair was filled. Kids on the floor, adults shoulder to shoulder. Too many elbows, not enough napkins, but plenty of laughter. I wore my apron, the one with the little embroidered leaves in a pocket that always collected spoons. My hair was pinned back, loose curls escaping at the edges, and I felt, though I didn't say it aloud, beautiful. Not in the mirror, not by the magazine standards, but in the way people looked at me. Needed me. Leaned toward me without thinking. That night, after the dishes were stacked and the last pie salvaged, Shelley sat beside me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, a mug of cider warming her fingers. "You make it look easy," she said softly. "What?" "All of this. Being the centre. Holding everything together. I hope I can do it like you one day." I remember that moment like a photograph. Her voice quiet with awe. My hands still damp from the dishwater. The way her eyes looked at me like I was someone, not just her mother, but something more. A compass. A lighthouse. That was the last Thanksgiving James was with us. He passed the following spring, sudden and quiet. A Tuesday of all days. After that, I tried to hold everything together on my own. And I did. For a while. But now, 28 years later, I sat on a folding cot in the garage, my knees stiff under a crocheted quilt, and thought, when did I stop being that woman? When did my daughter's eyes stop searching for mine? When did I go from the centre of gravity to the dust at the edge? I reached for my suitcase and unzipped the front pocket. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a framed recipe of my mother's stuffing, handwritten in blue ink, slightly faded. I had brought it with me, thinking maybe this visit would be a return. A small chance to feel needed again. I pressed my fingers to the glass. No one had asked for it. No one had even noticed I packed it. Back in 1996, my kitchen had been the command centre, orders shouted over boiling pots, kids dipping fingers into the mashed potatoes, laughter bouncing off the walls. I used to hum autumn leaves while I cooked, and James would sneak in behind me, arms circling my waist, face buried in my shoulder. Now the only song was the quiet drone of the garage space heater, its glow blinking in the corner like a lighthouse with no ship to guide. I closed my eyes. In this silence, I tried to summon the feeling of that Thanksgiving. The warmth. The clatter. Shell's head on my shoulder. The boy was shaking hands. James's laugh rumbling through the walls. I remembered thinking back then, this is what it means to be loved. And now? Now I was convenient. An afterthought. A piece of furniture they stored carefully, well-intentioned, perhaps, but with no real space for me anymore. I looked again at the recipe in its frame. I pressed the photo from the garage against it. The past and the present. Side by side. One full of fingerprints and joy. The other dust. The next morning, the sky was still the colour of tin when I heard a soft knock at the garage door. It wasn't Shelley. It was over my granddaughter. 12 years old, all elbows and questions, with a mop of hair too wild for barrettes. She peeked in, her breath puffing in little clouds from the cold. "Grandma," she whispered. "Are you awake?" I sat up slowly, pushing the quilt from my legs. "Of course, sweetheart, come in, but quickly, it's cold." She slipped inside and shut the door behind her, arms wrapped tight around herself. I pulled the quilt wide and she ducked under it with me, settling in like she used to during sleepovers when she was small and still thought I had all the answers. She looked around. "This is where you're staying." I smiled gently. "Just for a little while." She didn't reply at first. Just stared at the floor. "I told Mom you should be in the house," she said finally, her voice small. "Oh, Ava, it's not her fault. They're just juggling a lot." She nodded, but her jaw set in that way only children can manage, a fierce, indignant, and bothered by nuance. Then she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a granola bar. "Sorry, it's all I could sneak," she said. "But you didn't come to breakfast." I took it slowly, my throat tight. "Thank you, love." We sat like that a while, two figures in a dim garage, sharing crumbs and silence. And for a moment I let myself believe maybe things were turning. Maybe Shelley would see her daughter's quiet rebellion. Maybe she'd notice the cot, the space heat of the absence at the table. Maybe this small act of kindness would ripple upward. Maybe. That evening I stayed in the main house longer than usual. I hovered in the kitchen while they cooked. Shelley was making vegan shepherd's pie for Liz, and I offered to help dice the sweet potatoes. "Well, you don't need to," Shelley said not unkindly. "You've done enough just coming out." Still she passed me a knife. I peeled and chopped, careful to keep my pace slow and steady. The knife was heavier than I was used to, the peeler unfamiliar. For a brief moment it felt like old times. We moved around the kitchen with practiced rhythms. Greg uncorked a bottle of wine. Liz laughed too loudly at a story about yogurt guts. Shelley leaned back against the counter, wine glass in hand, cheeks flushed from the oven heat. And for the first time all weekend, someone asked me a question. "So, Mom," Shelley said, glancing over, "how's the community centre stuff going? Still doing those classes?" I blinked. I hadn't taught since June. My knees wouldn't let me stem that line anymore. But the fact that she remembered, even a scrap of it warmed something in me. "Yes," I said softly. "Not as often, but I'm still helping." "Good," she said, smiling. "You're always so good with people." That one sentence stayed with me the whole night. I laid in the cot with the quilt tucked up to my chin, eyes in the dark ceiling, replaying those words over and over. You're always so good with people. Maybe things were changing. Maybe I just needed to give them more time. Maybe I had been too quick to assume. Maybe tomorrow they'd offer me the guest room, or ask me to stay longer, or take out the family photo album, or bring up all of his baby pictures. Or I drifted to sleep with a thin thread of hope coiled under my ribs, like a candle still lit. But the morning was different. Colder. The garage door creaked open around 8 and Greg stepped in. "Hey," he said, voice clipped. "Just so you know, we've got an early brunch planned with Liz before she hits the road. Might get a little loud in the kitchen." I nodded. "Of course, I won't be in the way." He hesitated, then cleared his throat. "And if you don't mind keeping the garage door closed from now on, it's just Liz has allergies." I blinked. "To what exactly?" He shrugged. "Dust, mold, who knows, just trying to keep her comfortable." He didn't wait for a reply. The door clicked shut behind him. I looked around. At the space heater blinking again. At the quilt, the photo tucked behind the shelf, the granola wrapper still on the cot. And the hope that small, flickering thing glittered quietly inside me. Not extinguished by cruelty. Not stumped out by shouting. Just starved. Denied oxygen. That was the morning I knew. Not in a blaze of clarity, not in anger. Just in the still waste no falls where no one's watching. I didn't leave the garage that day. Not for a breakfast. Not for small talk. Not for the brunch that filled the house with the scent of rosemary, potatoes and laughter I wasn't part of. I stayed under the quilt. Fully dressed, back pressed against the cot's thin cushion, staring at the garage ceiling. A single cobweb trampled in the corner above the shelves, catching the morning light just so. Even it, I thought, had more of a place than I did. I was sad. Not exactly. Sadness has a shape. An edge you can lean against, a reason you can point to. This was something else. A dullness. Like standing knee-deep in cold water and forgetting you ever felt warmth. There was a time I filled rooms. Not with noise, but with presence. My name meant something then. Mom spoken with need. Grandma called out with joy. Now I wasn't even introduced. Last week I ran into an old neighbour at the post office. Janice, the one who used to borrow my cake stand every Christmas. She asked how the family was. I said they were fine. What I wanted to say was, I'm the one who raised them. And yet, now I wait in garages like bored furniture. But you don't say things like that. You don't speak of being forgotten while people still send you birthday cards. You don't confess that silence hurts more when it's polite. That afternoon I made a list in my head. Not of things to do I had no place to be, but of how I got here. I thought about the day I moved in with them temporarily, Shelley had insisted. Just while you recover from the fall, Mom, you'll be back home in no time. That was 3 winters ago. My apartment had been small but warm. Paid off. 2 blocks from the bakery where the girls knew my name. I gave it up for convenience. For family. Shelley promised I'd be part of everything. She meant it then. I believe that. But convenience has a short shelf life. People don't realise that even love, when laced with routine, can rot into obligation. They stop seeing you. And you start helping more, speaking less, shrinking yourself to fit the gaps they leave. At first, I volunteered. Drove over to piano. Took over laundry. Cooked dinners that no one remembered to thank me for. Then it wasn't volunteering anymore. It was expected. I became the cub rack. The warm body they didn't quite plan for but needed when the sitter cancelled or the groceries needed unloading. And slowly I stopped being asked things like, how are you sleeping? Or do you still like tea with lemon? Or what do you need? I didn't cry. That's the thing. At this age the tears come less. Not because we don't feel, but because the ache has settled too deep. It no longer spills out. It anchors. I looked at the space heater again, blinking weakly in the corner. There was something almost cruel in its effort, like it was trying so hard to be enough and still failing. I understood that. Deeply. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat at the edge of the cot and rubbed my knees. They throbbed in the cold. My left ankle had begun to swell again. I'd forgotten to elevate it. No one had noticed I was limping. And I hadn't reminded them. That's a quiet contract we make with invisibility. We stop making noise. We stopped being inconvenient. The family photo was still tucked behind the pink hands. I pulled it out, stared at our frozen smiles. My handwriting on the back is together always. But we weren't. Not anymore. We were a collection of polite exchanges and digital messages. And me, I was a placeholder. A name on a contact list, a warm body for emergencies, a person who stayed in garages and smiled through it. The cold from the floor rose through my slippers. I didn't reach for another blanket. I just sat there, still, like silence had taken shape. It was the hum of the refrigerator that woke me. Not the heater this time. That had blinked its last red eye sometime in the night, resigned, perhaps, to the same quiet defeat that had settled in my chest. But the refrigerator, old and reliable, buzzed on through the garage wall just beyond the laundry room. That sound of steady, mechanical, familiar pulled me gently out of sleep and into a new kind of stillness. Not the ache of being forgotten, but something clearer, quieter. I sat up slowly, the quilt pulling at my waist. My ankles cracked as they found the floor, and I took a deep breath. Something had shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even grief. It was the simple, stubborn truth that would not do this again. Not another winter folded into corners of someone else's life. Not another meal passed over. Not another moment where I smiled just to ease someone else's guilt. Not again. I reached for my slippers and stood, slowly. The cold kissed my knees, sharp and familiar. I walked toward the shelf and retrieved the framed photo, the one I had found behind the paint cans. I held it for a long moment. Our faces looked back at me, captured in younger light, eyes full of the belief that time would stretch wide and generous. That we'd always have room for each other. My fingers brushed the edge of the glass. Then I turned it over and reread the line I'd written in blue ink. Together always. I smiled, soft and sad. It had been a promise once. But now, it felt like a question. Did together still mean anything if only one person was keeping count? Outside, I heard the creak of pipes and the familiar hush of early morning footsteps. Someone was awake, probably Greg, always up early for his runs. In a few minutes, the coffee maker would groan, Shelley would shuffle in with sleep in her eyes, and the house would resume its routine. But I had already slipped out of theirs. I stood there, holding that photo like it weighed more than glass and paper. In some ways it did. It held years. It held effort. It held every small gesture I'd made that no one seemed to see. And I knew, with the same certainty that once told me whenever I had a fever before the thermometer confirmed it, it was time. Not for confrontation, not for anger. That wasn't me. But for distance. For space. For a rebalancing of where I placed my worth. I thought of the house I'd left behind 3 years ago. The quiet window that overlooked the bakery. The chair that still bore the shape of my reading hours. the lilac bush outside the kitchen that James had planted the spring after Shelley was born. I had left that place thinking I was moving toward family. Now I realised I had left my sanctuary to become a service. And the thought that came next was so simple, so pure, it took my breath away. I don't have to stay where I'm not seen. It didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like remembering. Remembering that I'm still a woman, not just a role. That I deserve warmth. That silence doesn't have to be the price of peace. I sat back on the cot, the photo still in my hands, and whispered into the morning. No more waiting. The heater flickered one last time, then went dark. I didn't mind, because the warmth was already rising enough from coils or blankets, but from the place where resolve begins. It was just after 7 a.m. when I packed my bag, not with fanfare, not with drama, just a quiet, deliberate folding of who I was, piece by piece, into a suitcase I hadn't touched since Jim's funeral. The navy wool cardigan he loved. The sensible shoes I always saved for long walks but rarely wore anymore. 2 books, one fiction, one familiar. My prescription bottle, a small bundle of letters I kept from Oliver, and the photograph. The one with the handwriting on the back. I folded the tulip quilt last of the orange and green one from 1982 and tucked it neatly on top. No one noticed. The garage door creaked when I opened it, but it was muffled beneath the rustling of early leaves and the thrum of a world waking up. In the kitchen, I left a note. Not angry. Just clear. Something came up. I'll be staying elsewhere tonight. Don't worry about me. That was all. I stood there for a moment, taking one last look at the kitchen counter, the fruit bowl full of bananas no one ever ate, the warm corner of the cabinet where Shelley used to bump her head as a child, the windowsill where I once lined her school pictures, year by year, each smile losing a little bit of baby roundness. Then I turned and stepped out the front door. The sky was soft grey, with threads of gold just beginning to peek through. I walked past the driveway, past the row of trash cans with the cracked lids, and down the street toward the bus stop. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew every line of that house, every crooked tile on the walkway, every place I had once mattered. At the corner, I saw the neighbour's dog again, the same one that barked at me the morning I arrived. This time, he watched me quietly through the fence, tail flicking once. The bus came 10 minutes later, brakes hissing as it settled beside the curb. The driver didn't ask questions when I paid in cash. I asked him to drop me near the willow bend in the little place I remembered from a trip James and I took in 1989, back when we still drove on Sundays with no destination in mind. We'd had pie there once, rhubarb, and laughed over how he chipped his tooth in the crust. The inn hadn't changed much. Same red shutters. Same rocking chairs in the porch. Inside, the woman at the front desk wore a faded sweatshirt and a tired smile. "Do you have a room?" I asked. She glanced up, took me in with a practiced kindness. "Single queen?" she asked. "With a window if possible," I said. She nodded, handed me a key and offered to carry my bag. I declined. The room was warm not just in temperature, but in feeling. Quilts layered neatly on the bed. A gas fireplace flickering with gentle light. A small table by the window with a vase of dried flowers and 2 mismatched teacups. I set my suitcase down and sat by the fire, pressing my palms to the warmth. No one knew where I was. Not Shelley. Not Greg. Not even Ava. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt mine. Later, I wandered to the small cafe just beyond the parking lot. The kind with chalkboard menus and old linoleum floors that squeaked when you shifted in your seat. A couple from Iowa married 42 years. They told me you offered to share their table. The place was full, and they waved me over like an old friend. "You've got a glow about you," the woman said, passing me the cream. I laughed a real laugh, and burdened I'm full. "Must be the heater," I said. Or maybe just not sleeping in a garage. She blinked, unsure if I was joking. I let her wander. That night I wrote postcards. One to Ava, thanking her for the granola bar and the loyalty. One to myself, not to send, just to say it out loud. "You are not invisible, you've simply been quiet too long." I signed it like I used to sign birthday cards. "Love always. Mom." The Christmas cards went out early that year. Not accidentally, deliberately. The week before December even began, I sat by the inn's window, the scent of pine and hearth fire weaving through the air, and addressed each envelope in my steady, slanted hand. I wrote to friends from long ago, to cousins in Indiana, to the neighbour who used to shovel my driveway before his back gave out. And yes, I wrote to Shelley. Her envelope was just like the others. Cream-coloured, soft-weight paper, a red holly stamp in the corner. Inside, a single folded card of watercolour for trees in the front, a quiet snowfall captured in gentle brushstrokes. No letter inside. Just one line, handwritten in the space where people usually filled news and updates and seasonal cheer. Thank you for reminding me where I belong. That was all. No return address. No explanation. No drama. I sealed it and placed it in the outgoing pile, then took the stack into the mail slot by the innkeeper's office, the brass bell chiming softly as the wooden lid closed. It felt like closing a chapter. No more like setting down a weight. For years I'd carried the hope that they'd notice. That they'd remember. That they'd look up from their busy lives and see me not just as a helper or a background character or a babysitter when plans fell through, but as a whole person. A mother. A woman. A history. I realised, as the final envelope slipped through the slot, that I had waited too long for something that was never coming. And in that realisation, something unlatched. Not bitterly. Gently. That night, I stood by the fireplace with a mug of tea and watched the snow fall through the inn's lodge front window. A family passed outside bundled coats, red cheeks, laughter spilling across the parking lot. I didn't know them. But they smiled at me through the glass, and I smiled back. Not longing. Just warmth. I went upstairs and pulled the quilt tight over my shoulders. The photo frame sat on the bedside table, its back propped open slightly now, the note still tucked behind the glass, still bearing my handwriting. In case anyone wonders, I was here too. But that note wasn't for them anymore. It was for me. Because I had wondered in the quiet and the years where I gave and smiled and bent myself into shapes just to stay useful, I had wondered if I mattered. Now I knew. I mattered when I stood in my own warmth. I mattered when I stopped waiting to be invited in and chose instead to build a fire for myself. No one called that night. No messages. No missed calls. No apologies. And for once I didn't check. Because the gesture had been made. Final. Clean. Kind. I turned off the lamp and whispered into the darkness the way I used to whisper to James when sleep wouldn't come. I'm okay now. And I was. Not because they said sorry. Not because anything changed back home. But because I had changed where I stood. It's funny what you notice when your heart isn't clenched and waiting anymore. The way the sunlight rests differently on your hands in the morning. The crisp scent of snow in the air before it falls. The particular comfort of drinking tea in a room you chose and not one you were placed in. I've been at the inn for 4 days now. Each morning I walk down the narrow path that wraps behind the property. It curves through tall, thin trees and leads to a small overlook where you can see the lake shimmer in winter stillness. I wear my cardigan, the thick one James always said made me look like I stepped out of a storybook. I carry no phone. No schedule. I just walk. And I breathe. And I exist. Fully. Without apology or need for validation. I thought I would feel lonely. That stepping away, truly away from the family I once held so close, would leave me hollow. But what I feel more than anything is relief. Relief from shrinking. Relief from waiting. Relief from hoping for crumbs when I deserve the whole table. At the end, people know my name. The woman at the front desk greets me each morning with a smile and a soft mess of cutter. There's fresh apple bread in the dining room. The couple from Iowa invited me again to dinner last night. We sat for hours talking about travel and music and the way the world feels smaller as we age, but our memories grow larger. They didn't know my family story. They didn't need to. They saw me, not as someone's mother or grandmother or inconvenience. Just me. And it turns out that's enough. Yesterday I received a message from Shelley. A photo. The whole family gathered around the Christmas tree. Lights blinking, of her holding a present in mitten wrapping. Shelley smiled at the camera. Greg had one arm around her. Even Liz was there. I wasn't. Again. But this time I looked at the photo and felt nothing sharp. Only distance. And a strange kind of gentleness. I didn't need to be in that picture to know who I was. I didn't need to stand among them to know I still had worth. Because sometimes the coldest places aren't outside, they're in rooms where your absence is easier than your presence. And sometimes the warmest feeling isn't love that keeps you near. It's love that sets you free, I didn't reply to the photo. Not out of pettiness, but because it didn't ask for me, and I didn't need it to. This morning I wrote one last card. No envelope, no address. Just a small note card placed gently inside the photo frame on the nightstand. You were not forgotten. You remembered yourself. I tucked it behind the old picnic photo alongside my original note. Then I opened the window, letting the winter air rush in sharp, bracing, alive. And I smiled. Not out of bitterness. Not in triumph over anyone else. But because I had found something worth more than being invited to the table. I had found the courage to set one for myself. Final line. Sometimes the coldest places aren't outside. But I found my own warmth.